I was sporty, but not interested in sports. I was creative, but like I wasn't necessarily an artist in that sense. I did a lot of stuff. I played instruments. I played at least 3. I did swimming all the time. Like when I say I did so much stuff, I did martial arts, I did swimming, I did art, I did music, I did drama, I did dance, I did singing, I did all of these things. I did everything, all of that. I played basketball, I played football, I played rugby, I swam, I did all of the things that you would expect a typical boy, young man to do. I was very physical, like growing up. I was also very, very, I want to say cerebral, but I used my mind a lot. I was very much thinking and writing and things like that. But again, it just kind of, for me, it was just a matter of just changing what a man could be, specifically a black man.
Welcome to another episode of Everyday Leadership. And as you can see, if you're watching this on YouTube, this is slightly different. I'm actually in a studio. You know, once in a while I tend to do it, and this man got me out my yard. Maybe come all the way down to West London to actually make this happen. But I have mental health consultant, trainer, author of the wonderful book, Time to Talk, How Men Think About Love, Belonging and Connection, which if you haven't got it, go and get that for sure. Award-winning podcaster in his own right. And just today, you know, we're flipping the script. We're having him on the end of it. I have Alex Holmes in the building. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good. So I didn't bring you nowhere, number one. Yeah. You could have told me anywhere to arrive and I would have come. But it just so happened that it was very local to me. So we have to, you know, thank God for convenience and efficiency. But yeah, no, I'm good, man. I'm good. Thank you for having me on the show. How are you?
I'm looking forward to this. You know, I've known Alex for the last number of years, and when we talk about mental health, he is one of this go-to person. He's someone who's very learned, and I want to delve into some of that experience. But before we do, something I always like to do is understand who the person is. Like, why? Why are you curious about the subjects and the things that you talk about and what you do? So let's go back to younger Alex, actually. I want to go to 6. I'm between 6 and 10, Alex.
6 and 10.
Yeah, let's go way back.
Oh my days. This reminds me of when I had to do some inner child work with my therapist. And she was like, okay, so let's go back to the age of 6. No, she's like, what age do you think that, you know, it all changed for you? And I was like, no, it didn't. She's like, let's go to 6. And I was like, why 6? Like, and it's funny because I do that with my clients too now. But 6, yeah, happy-go-lucky child. Pretty much very curious, always in people's business, but not in people's business, you know.
What's changed there? I can see that.
You know, I know things I shouldn't be knowing, but I'd be knowing them, you know what I'm saying? Loved writing, loved reading. I was into books from a very early age.
Was that how? Like, was it your parents? Or was the influence?
I was just left to my own devices. And I had a conversation with my dad about this yesterday, about imagination. And he was talking about his imagination led him to tech and kind of like how things work and all that stuff. And I was like to him, well, mine kind of led me to words, the written word, communication, that sort of thing. So I remember like one of my earliest things was I had this this book, and it was like teddy bears in it, but it was like French and English. And I was learning, and it's like, I don't know what it was, but I was just very interested in French and English from an early age. And I remember just sitting there reading. I had no idea. I was like, oh, so this is red, so this must mean red in this, and this is t-shirt in English, and this must be t-shirt in that. And I remember doing that by myself, and I don't remember ever having somebody sit there and be like, this is French, do that. I was just kind of like sitting there with the books myself and learning all of that. So yeah, so between 6 and 10, I was just very much just like writing stories. I remember finding a digital typewriter. I have no idea. Thing is, I wish I could go back and actually figure out the origins of where all these things come from. But when you're just a child and you see things appear, you don't question where they come from. Well, I didn't. But you don't question where they come from. They just arrive magically. And I found this digital typewriter, and it's like you could kind of It was obviously a typewriter, but it was, yeah, you could write down and it comes up on the screen and then it'll print off as it goes. And I just used to be like, oh, this is really cool. And I used to write little stories on there, have my little journal, have my little books and things like that. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much kind of where it all began. My mindset, I was very introverted anyway, not antisocial, just introverted. I was just very much just like, I'm happy with my own company. I'm cool to sit where I need to be and just focus on what I'm doing. And then, yeah, and then that pretty much shifted a lot when my aunt died when I was 10. And there was a huge life change that happened because my mum's older sister. And as part of that change, we took in my cousins as part of that. So then the family kind of just expanded, and the space that I had for myself was no longer that. It was very much kind of mixed in with a lot of grief, family, a lot of stuff that's going on. I then all of a sudden, I was always the eldest, but I got elevated to house key, phone, all these different things, 10, 11, responsible for kind of walking siblings to school and picking siblings up and all this different stuff. So the sense of responsibility then came, and a lot of the childlike curiosity was kind of massaged out of me, in a sense. Massaged, pushed out, or whatever. These are circumstances around you. It's just the nature of how things just have to speed up. And as a child, you just think to yourself, oh my God, like, this is just what has to happen. Yeah, because I always look back at it and I always think to myself, what was my childhood like? And I sit down with my cousin sometimes and we have this conversation, and it's like it all seems to be okay until we were 10 and 9, and then it just kind of went all over the gaff. But that tends to happen with kids based on kind of the training I'm doing now and the studies and whatnot. It tends to happen. Like there's usually quite a big shift in environment and personality that happens from around 9 to 10. And it just happens, like whether that be a divorce or a loss or a catastrophic event.
There's a lot of data around commonality of that happening.
Yeah, it tends to, I don't know why that is. I don't know what that is, but I'm still trying to figure that out. But it's like there's a particular age where things start to shift, and sometimes it's a big shift, sometimes it's just a kind of a mild shift, but it's a shift nonetheless. And it and it can be traumatic for a lot of people.
Are there times when that shift also, like you said, for you, that curiosity that you had, that time and space that you had kind of went away for a period of time at least? But it seems like you still kind of held on to some of that, because with what you do now, in particular, with the writing that you do, even over the years of being a journalist, which Alex has been in the past, and even the curiosity you have for the insatiable nature of reading books and really understanding stuff. Even studying French at uni. Like all those things that you had when you were younger, is that you kind of rediscovered it. So how did you get back into still holding on to some molecule of that?
I don't know. I guess it was a lifeline, I suppose. It was one of those things where it was the only thing that I could have. Like, I was sporty, but not interested in sports. I was creative, but like I wasn't necessarily an artist in that sense. Like I wasn't somebody who, I painted, I drew, I sketched, I did a lot of stuff. I played instruments. I played at least 3. I did swimming all the time. Like when I say I did so much stuff, I did martial arts, I did swimming, I did art, I did music, I did drama, I did dance, I did singing, I did all of these things. I did everything, all of that. I think that the one thing that kind of like really held everything together was just that kind of searching for that story, or kind of really kind of honing in on that. I think and that was the one thing that really kept me grounded, actually. Because I remember when I was in year 6, so that's probably age 10, 11, going into, no, not even that, it was actually 11. And I remember reading Into the Looking Glass by Lewis Carroll, the Alice in Wonderland, I want to say sequel. But and I remember sitting there reading that, and I was just like drawn in by all of these characters and all of this stuff. But I didn't think it was necessarily strange for me to be doing that at 11. Really not wanting to do the chores because I want to read instead. And that's not necessarily typical for a lot of boys. It's like, I don't want to do the chores because I want to go and play PlayStation or do something else completely counter to that. But I was just very focused on wanting to be caught up in the story, and whether that be Harry Potter, whether that be the Darren Shan Vampire's Assistant books or whatever, it was the books that grounded me, and it was stories that grounded me, and so that was one of the big things that really kept me going. And I think a lot of the stuff and a lot of the work I do now is all about people's stories and about how we kind of what we learn, how we learn it, and kind of what that means for our life as we try to move forward in it, and how we have to keep rewriting things and editing and putting stuff out there, trying stuff,
which ain't easy. Like, it's not easy. And
it's
even
painful stuff.
The unraveling process, like you said, it's very painful. Even taking the time to be like, where is this come from? Is it childhood that happened at 11? Is it something else that happened in my lifetime? What is it about me? And when I think about, in particular, the work you do around men, I find it quite interesting when you're talking about some of your teenage years, because you're tall. And naturally, when people look at you, they'll probably think, like, athlete, like stereotypes, all that kind of stuff will easily kind of come at you.
Yeah.
And then what you talk about is very, very different. So it could even take people off guard. Did you find that stereotype being there as you were navigating as a teenager while having all this interest in the weird, the wonderful, the intriguing, the stories, all of that kind of stuff? And how was you navigating that? How's that helped shape some of how you understand men and the young men that you work with in particular?
I think what it taught me was that men can be different to what you expect them to be, generally, because ultimately I was just not that guy. And I keep having these conversations, with men, and it's just so funny because men will be chatting to me and be saying things, and I'll be like, but why? This is like, so okay, so that's what happens, so what next? Like, what are we doing? And it's like, but it's weird because I said I did all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I played basketball, I played football, I played rugby, I swam, I did all of the things that you would expect a typical boy, that's young man to do. I was very physical, like growing up. I was also very, very, I want to say cerebral, but I used my mind a lot. I was very much thinking and writing and things like that. But again, it just kind of, for me, it was just a matter of just changing what a man could be, specifically a black man could be. Because when I looked at my, I don't know, what do you call them, classmates, colleagues and whatnot, and who happened to be white or who happened to be Southeast Asian and whatnot, their kind of typical understanding of masculinity was very different to my black friends' understanding of masculinity. I remember growing up in school, the guys that I hung around with who were predominantly black, it was very much about rapping and football. And if they were a bit edgy and a bit out there, it was basketball. And I think that was as far. That was the edge. And that was the edge. A few of us did swimming. A few of us did that. And that level of, but doing anything out of that kind of remit, it was kind of seen, and it was kind of seen as being unusual or unheard of or unlikely. And it wasn't until I started growing older, I started seeing the poets coming out into this kind of, the late 2010s, 2011, possibly 12, right? The poets, the spoken word stuff, the finger clicking and all them things. But I grew up and it was just like everybody was playing Pro Evo. Everyone was playing FIFA. Yeah. And I just wasn't doing that because I had A-levels to get. You know what I mean? Like, I had to get out of here. Like, you guys want to stay there. And that's the mentality I was having back then. So I think over time it was just kind of really restructuring and redefining what it means to be a man. Or it's not saying that you can't like those things, but it's just saying that you're not limited and restricted to those things. You can look outwards and think, okay, cool, I like to do that. I like to do that. It doesn't make me any different to who I am. It just means I'm expanding myself into other areas and into other parts of life.
So how do you define masculinity?
How do I define masculinity? I guess if the question is what do I think about masculinity, then I think it's a non-entity. How do I define masculinity? I define it as a mask, as a facade, as a thing that people use to they use it to not explain the rest of something else. Does that make any sense? So they'll be like, oh, you're affecting my masculinity. My masculinity is being challenged.
Yeah.
With that, we need masculine men. We need this stuff. But what do you actually mean? Am I challenging your sense of self? Am I challenging what you think about a situation? Am I challenging what you think you should be in a situation? Am I challenging your beliefs about X, Y, Z situation? Like, what does a masculine man do? Does a masculine man hunt and kill? Are we in BC, AD, whatever? Like, does a masculine man look after his family? And in that sense, when he's looking after his family, what does he do to look after his family? Does he look after himself? Does he look after the planet? What does a masculine man do? I don't understand what masculinity is. It doesn't make any sense. So,
we use it so much though. It's a word, like I said, we throw it around
exactly.
time and time again.
Yeah, we use it as a blanket. We use it as a blanket because the thing is about language, and I studied linguistics at uni, linguistics and French. It was just so funny because the ambiguity of language, especially in the English language, is that there isn't a lot of things are up for interpretation, and because there's no specifics, or people are still debating what love is. Love is a word that's been around for like centuries and millennia, yeah? The feeling has been around for centuries and millennia, and we still cannot describe what that is. So there is an ambiguity in particular areas of language, but I think that we're consistently trying to figure out how to define it. And that's why we consistently need to be in a process of redefining and restructuring and then reconnecting that with what we are doing, in a sense. So, and then how do you define masculinity? I just define it as just being, I guess, because to be esoteric about it, an energy. The same way I would define femininity as being an energy. And I think that if we are all holistic beings, then we all have those elements in those areas. I mean, a man can still be nurturing, but still be protecting. The same way a woman can be such. The same way a non-binary person can be such. The same way, that you are going to protect what you care about.
I like that though. I think even that description he gave of not looking at the word, what's behind the word. I think a lot of times we stop at the word, and said in the past, like way back in the day, when I used to do some stuff, my wife wanted to annoy me. She was like, be a man. And and it used to get to me for a little while, like, why are you saying that for? This before we got married and stuff like that. We're still young and mature. Why are you saying that for? What do you mean be a man? I'm a man, blah, blah, blah. Until the day I stopped, I'm like, what do you mean? Like, what do you actually mean by be a man? What is it that I'm doing or not doing and everything else like that? And I had to effectively take the sting out of the word to actually disseminate that from me, and no longer became an issue because it can be used against me. But a lot of times you don't go there. It's like you said, growing up, child in the playground, all that kind of stuff, that whole energy that you bring, it's like you're just supposed to appear in a particular way. And it's interesting, I was reading about Andrew Tate yesterday, and schools. I'm sure you see that schools said something about Andrew Tate and about protecting against him. I was like, wow, I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
Where schools are actually intentionally talking about someone in the public like that.
Yeah.
That's very, very different.
I've had certain conversations with schools, and they have reached out to me to come and speak at schools. And, because of Andrew Tate specifically, I've come up in the conversation I've had with head teachers and assistant heads or whatever who's asking me to do this stuff, these assemblies and whatnot. And I'm tired of this man. I'm actually very tired of this man. He's giving me content, I'm very tired of this man. But, what specifically about Andrew Tate do you
No, but he's someone that I would say he talks about the whole masculine energy, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that in a day and age that we live in now, where we are starting to delve behind the words, explore vulnerability, feelings. I know you have your breakdown that you've got around shame, vulnerability, which we're going to delve into. But all those different elements are there. You then have this school of thought that is also growing back in popularity, and it seems to be young kids in particular are buying into it. And I was like, that's very rare. It's backwards. It felt very backwards to me.
Yeah.
But yet it's still there. It's really prevalent.
One thing about young kids, I do think that we don't give them as much credit as we should. And I think that some of them are very wise. Some of them will look at it and be like, this man is chatting absolute rubbish, right? It's not necessarily something that they believe in or something that they understand to believe in. But there are some young people who are easily led. And I think this does just happen. I do think it does just happen at schools. Like, these things happen. Growing up, it was like listening to particular areas of music who would then guide the way that you think as a young man. You think in a particular way, you guide the way that you think you should act and should do and whatnot, especially when you're not necessarily mature enough to understand what is happening in the world and what the ramifications of certain things are, right? So that's something that I kind of really think is important to have, and not to condescend these young people, but to kind of just feed them more information that they need, because I think it's important to be like, all right, cool, you're listening to what this guy's saying, and this is why it's harmful, and this is what he's saying, and let's break it down. Let's have this conversation with these kids. As for that topics coming back up into the media or come back into popular conversation, the likes of Tate and Peterson, and I want to add Piers Morgan into this just for jabs. It's like, you know what I mean? But I feel like there's this, I guess in marketing, a lot of people talk about pain points. And we've had this conversation about pain points and how speaking to specific audiences and whatnot. And as soon as there's certain words that men are accustomed to hearing and understanding, things like violence, things like threat, things like dominance, things like power, things like masculinity, masculine, like, did I say strength? Around that. Alpha male, alpha this, alpha that. And there are certain words that a lot of men have not been able to identify with. I remember when I was in second year of uni, I had conversations with my male friends around and it just feels so stupid to have this conversation now in my mind, but alpha male, beta male, omega male, sigma male, yeah?
Sigma, I haven't heard that word.
So the alpha is the alpha, the omega is, no, the alpha is the alpha, the beta is the second, the omega is the bottom of the rung, the sigma is like Scar from the Lion King.
Wow,
like the black sheep, just literally just be like, by themselves, they will kill you if they need to, but they won't actually need to do that if you just don't cross them, sort of thing, if we're putting it into very simple terms. But as I kind of like grew up and matured into this kind of person I am, reading and just generally listening to people and trying to understand life in itself, none of that exists. None of that makes any sense. But for some people, it does, and it's important to them. And when you start speaking to those pain points to specific men, to specific sectors of the community who don't feel like they are able to embrace their true manliness or their true masculinity, whatever that means, whatever that looks like, they then kind of lean into the messaging there. Because there was a phrase that I think Tate or Peterson was using, but it was this idea that for a man to be taken seriously, he needs to be considered a threat, or he needs to be considered violent, or whatnot. And I was like, what are you talking about? And the idea is that if you are a man and you look like you can defend yourself and you look like you can, fight or whatnot, you'll be taken more seriously than somebody who does not look like they can or cannot defend themselves. And I remember thinking, all right, well, that sounds like the kind of Zen proverb of the whole, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war, right? So learn to defend yourself. But still be nurturing and able to just do the thing. But somebody tries to come into the garden and trample on your chrysanthemums, right? You can, probably handle what you need to handle or defend yourself in a way. And I was thinking, what is the difference between this messaging and that messaging? One is mindful in that you can have the things you can nurture, you can look after, you can grow, you can do your stuff, and also know how to defend yourself. The other one is fight, or be killed. And I think that there are certain elements of language that are really connected to the pain points of men right now, specifically. And I think it's very, and that's why we're heading down this really slippery slope in this conversation around masculinity, quote unquote, because it's just like, well, what do we like? What is it? What should we be listening to? And yeah, men are no longer men apparently. But again, time is progressing, and the mines are closed. No one's going down there. Certain wars, wars and certain things are like, I mean, it's just not what it was we're not in 1911. Times are just very different. So the necessity of men, but again, it all just boils down to the devaluing of men and the devaluing of men's bodies and the disassociation that men are supposed to have with themselves. Because most things that men have are external to them.
But then you now see the stats around suicide and depression, and every time something major like that on like Twitch or whatever happens, you get thoughts and prayers. You get that, oh my gosh, this is sad. But then on the flip side of that, the general normal day to day, the commentary is just it's just feeding so much of that. And that's why even when you're talking about some of the breakdowns that you have, like let's go for the first one, for example, around shame. Shame and men a word that, generally speaking, I want to say under an external, you don't associate together because man doesn't want to talk about that. But the reality is actually a lot of us feel shame. And I want you to kind of just speak on that from your perspective, as I know you've done research. Alex goes deep in this stuff. But talk about that, actually, why it's important to be able to recognize that, to actually be able to even say the words. So.
Yeah, it's important because we're speaking specifically around men and those who identify as such, through life, you enact or encounter shame quite often as a man. There are certain milestones that you feel you should be hitting at particular points in life. There are certain successes that you think you should be having because this is what you've been told that you should have as a man. When it comes to even fatherhood, and you'll probably attest to some of this. I can't, but I'm just going from the observations of my friends who are fathers and the fathers around me. The particular levels of shame that come with connecting with your children and not necessarily being able to connect with them in particular ways, or not being able to give them the same things that your respected others or significant others can give them. There's a shame that comes there. There's the shame whereby, you're not, if you don't feel like you're strong, and again, using the Tate and Peterson kind of understanding, they're using shame to draw men in. But if you're not strong enough, if you don't have clear enough thoughts, if you can't, speak succinctly or directly or whatever, you can't get your point across in an elegant way, if you can't win certain things, they're all shaming ideas. If you can't do certain things that you feel that men should be able to do. We're having this debate just yesterday actually with my dad about, I'm kind of trying to help him understand about his generation's ideas of what they needed to know versus what my generation's ideas needed to know.
Boy.
And it's one of those things, and it's really interesting to me because we were having this conversation. He was like, well, if you are in a relationship and you're required to do something like put up a shelf or whatnot, and you don't know how to do that, would you not feel embarrassed about not being able to do that? And I said, no, because I don't know how to do it. I will go and learn how to do it and then do it. And then once you learn how to do something the first time, it might not be perfect, but at least the next time, you know how to do it. I'm not going to use that screw. I'm not going to use that joiner. I'm not going to use this, that, ever. Oh, I'm going to use that wood next time. I'm going to do the X, Y, and Z. I'm going to measure it this way. You know what I mean? Or I'll come to you and you teach me how to do it. Like, what is the problem with being able to go out and then ask for support in something that you don't know? And that's where the shame principle comes in. Like, you start to think, well, I should know how to do this. I should know how to install a washing machine and fix it. I should know how to put up shelves. I should know how to build X, Y, and Z. I should know how to patch this stuff up. I should know how to paint my house. I should know how to, I should, all of these shoulds.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately I'm not a painter and decorator. So why should I know how to do this stuff? I do think it's important to know how to look after your house. And I do think it's important to know how to preserve certain things in the home, for example. But the same way you look after your body, you know, like your health and say things like your car and your kids and your family and whatnot. And there's certain things you're going to get wrong the first time, but you have to just try and do it again. Or, you know, like if you want to varnish something, but you don't want to pay someone to varnish it, then you learn how to varnish your banister, for example. I wouldn't necessarily say that's a masculinity, like that's something that men should do. But if you want to do it, then you learn how to do it. Does that make any sense?
It does.
So, yeah, I think, and then you feel ashamed when you can't. And I just get to myself, and I just sit back and I'm like, why do I feel ashamed that I can't, that I don't know what sealer to get to put around the bathroom? Why do I feel ashamed about that? But I can go and find out if I want to. And then when I do find out, then I won't feel ashamed about it. So let me go and find out. What if I want to cook and I don't know how to cook X, Y, and Z? I just open up the recipe book and I go and have a look at the stuff. Little things like this that kind of hold a lot of men back from doing things.
It's expectation. Like, in look at that generation, for example, the expectation is you should know how to do X. It's society expects as a man you should know how to paint, protect your house, blah, 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 blah. Yes, I know a lot of that's stereotypical and generalized, but that's where it comes from. And if a lot of us are, that's what's handed down to us, that's what we run with. And that's what we then now becomes our own. Whether it's there hidden, subtle, or whatever, when there's someone turns around and says, well, you can't do that. Naturally speaking, yeah, you're like, I can't. But able to say the words, no, I can't, makes you feel shame. So unraveling that and letting go of that to be like, actually, you know what? I know how to do that. Live in my line and check and learn. It's interesting that we live in a world now where we can actually have access to so much information to pick things up a lot quicker.
That's very true. That's one caveat I always say. Like, as a generation, we can actually just
do that.
We can find ways. WikiHow, that helps.
But do you think it's letting go of that, changing some of that shame is down solely to men, or do you think, let's say for example, so look at if you're in a relationship, for example, the partner, the choice you make of partner makes a difference as to how you deal with your shame. Because someone can use that and use it against you and makes you feel so much more worse than ever. You don't want to open up.
Yeah, because the way I look at shame, I kind of break it down into 5 steps. When you look at your beliefs, what do you believe about yourself? What do you believe about the world? And what do you believe about the situation that you're in regards to those kind of areas? And if your belief is that you are not successful if you're alone, or if you're not successful if you're not in a partnership with somebody, when you're in a partnership with somebody and they are shaming you, you're more likely going to stay in that situation because the belief you have of yourself is going to hold you there. So because you're doing all of that, you're probably going to be so used to somebody being like, oh, you can't put shelves up. Well, I need to go ask my brother, or I need to go because he's a man and he can do X, Y, and Z. That's just one example of somebody who is using shame to coerce you into particular behaviors. And I think that one of the ideas for me is that, because one of the last points is knowledge and self-knowledge. And once you know yourself well enough, you know what you kind of know what you can and can't do, and you know what is good for you and what is not good for you. And me personally, I wouldn't want to be with somebody that does that, because then what's the point? I can't do anything like that, because we're just going to consistently be in problems all the time. Because I know myself well enough, and I know that, and I can admit when I can't do something. So, but if you're consistently badgering me about not knowing how to do something, then what's that going to do to my self-esteem? And a lot of men have this issue of low self-esteem because of that kind of battering down, but it does kind of represent itself in other ways. There's a reaction that happens to that, and I can react with, arguments, I can react with violence, I can react with so many different avenues that come from that. So when we start to look at kind of how we respond to this element of shame and this area of shame, then, and when you're in those partnerships, it's about knowing what you are willing to tolerate. That all starts with what we believe about ourselves. So the beliefs are very important, because if you believe that you are someone who can learn something and needs to expand themselves and kind of will always consistently get better if they consistently learn, then you not knowing how to do something isn't a problem, because you're just like, okay, cool. I don't feel bad about myself because I don't know how to learn. I don't know how to do that, sorry, but I can go out and learn. Because my own belief is that that doesn't challenge me as a person. So yeah, it's all about our belief system very much. So a lot of men have a very, very poor standard of beliefs for themselves.
All right, so ever-going journey that we all have to go through, consistently learning about ourselves and unraveling. And before we go into the rest, I'm curious, what's your journey? What's that journey been like for you? You getting to know and understand yourself, your character, develop that self-awareness.
I was crumpled on the floor in the corner. I had to do all of that work so that I could come and just out here and just be the man I am today. So I worked as a journalist for 5 years, and it was just after I had come back from teaching English abroad. And when I was teaching English, before I came back, I was in the Indian Ocean, and I was living life. It was fun. Like, I had 12 hours. It was 12-hour weeks. Well, 12-hour weeks. I was earning good money, good euros. Okay, so here we go. Here we get to I was asking myself this for the past, for 2 years at least. Why am I here? Why am I had to come back. So, and I remember, it was great. Like, I was teaching English. It was like beaches every afternoon, and then they had a lot of time off because it was French, so they had a lot of strikes. And there was like monsoon season or hurricane season, so when it's just raining heavily, like no one's going anywhere, you're just at home. And that was fun for me because you still got paid, and I'd just be lying there watching TV shows in my air-conditioned room, like literally living my best and understanding that. But and then doing private tutoring along that. But I remember sitting on my bed and I had like all these options in front of me, and I was thinking to myself, like, what do I want to do? Because I know that my time was coming up. Do I stay for another year? Do I do a master's in linguistics? Do I go into acting? Do I go into publishing? Or do I go into journalism? Which one do I want to do? And I think if we talk about like the kind of multi-dimensional, multiverses, and there is one Alex who picked the masters. There is one Alex who picked acting. There is one Alex who picked publishing. There is one Alex who did it. You know what I mean? There is one of those people. And then I think I got a text message from my dad, and he basically was just like, I think it's time that you come home and do some real work. But here's an application for the Daily Mail to go in. You get a scholarship. It's a 2-year, 18-month scholarship in collaboration with the Stephen Lawrence Foundation. And they're looking for, the way that this wording is so wild, but they're looking for ethnic minorities from from underprivileged backgrounds who are the first to go to uni in their family, X, Y, and Z. I was like, and the thing is, it's so funny because when we went into, me and my friend who we happened to get the scholarship at the end, and we looked at it and we were actually having this conversation, and we were just like, are you from an underprivileged background? And I'm like, no. Like, and she was like, I mean, but it's very funny that that's what they think when they think of black people. They think because you're black, you're from an underprivileged background, and because you're the first to go to uni in your immediate family. My extended family, I was definitely not the first to go to uni, but because I was the first in my immediate family, then again, it's a problem. I remember one of the questions in the interview was like, again, how did you get here? Like, and I had to explain this story of my grandparents coming from the Caribbean and landing here and doing this stuff. They did not come on a ship, they flew. And they landed at Gatwick or Heathrow or wherever, and they met family and friends, and they drove to wherever they needed to be, you know what I mean? Like, so it was very interesting how their idea was this kind of Windrush story, and my idea was, okay, my grandparents were of that generation, but they never took the Windrush, so I don't know what to add to this. Anyway, so, but that painted the picture for what my kind of experience was to be there. The token, the diversity hire, the person who would cover all of the problematic people of color stories, and just do that because it's a privilege for them to be here in this space. And it was a lot of pressure for me. It was a lot of pressure for me because I know that I wanted to write, as you know, from the story I told you earlier. So I read a lot, wrote a lot. I really wanted, the reason I got into journalism is because I wanted to write full time. And I wanted to make sure that I had the skills I needed to write well. And that came, but at the expense of kind of like the style I was writing in wasn't necessarily the style I wanted to write in. But the things I did learn was how to write to a deadline, how to be disciplined in your writing, how to proofread for yourself, how to copy edit and line edit, figure out what you're doing. But in doing that, I was surrounded by people who chose not to understand me. I say chose because it's a conscious thing that they actively went about and did, and they alienated me. And even where I was physically placed in certain areas, and it just didn't feel like, it wasn't a comforting environment to be in. It wasn't good. And you know, there were things that were said to me with regards to my background or my experience. So when you think about, a lot of these people went to either Eton or Cambridge, Oxford or Ludgrove or all these places. All of them know editors from other papers. Their dads do up their golf sessions, and a lot of things are traded on the golf course and all this different stuff. That's how they got here. And I got here through a diversity scheme. And again, it's about the beliefs thing. What does that do to you? What does that do? How does that make me feel about myself doing this work? Am I good enough to be here? Is it something that I can excel in here in the same way that you can excel in? Are you better than me just by default because your dad can get you into rooms that my dad can't do for me? Like, what does that all look like? So then the beliefs kept like belittling me down, but then it kind of trickled down to the work. So when I was doing my articles, I was doing my best, making sure that it was the best thing, double, triple checking, making sure that everything was aligned. Still wasn't good enough in some areas. I had work taken away from me. I had work passed on to I'd written articles and I had those articles passed on to other journalists who were of the same level as me. I've had articles put in there that I worked hard, forged good relationships with the sources and the PRs and all these different things, building a good like portfolio of stories, doing all these different things, only to come in the next day or see my name in print, but it's shared with somebody else. And I think in journalism, in print, when you see a name, okay, if it's the one person, it's the one person that wrote it. But if it's two people, the second person that it's named after, it anchored it. No, supported it. And the first person anchored it. So the first person kind of wrote most of the story, and the second person got like extra quotes or whatever. And they kind of got added onto the piece. And it was a lot of that. It was a lot of kind of, you're not ready yet. You're not quite there yet. Oh, it's not that good. It's It's yeah. You've got, you like, if you like, and then so that was news. And then I went to entertainment, and it was the same thing. And I left that whole paper, and I went to the Metro, and I did features, and it was the exact same thing. I interviewed UB40. I interviewed like, what's his name? Is it Now Rogers? I interviewed all these people. I went out of my way to speak to really amazing people and write up these reviews for hotels and write up these reviews for well-being and all this different stuff. Did that on metro.co.uk as well. But again, the exact same things kept coming up. So then what does this do? It cripples how I feel about what I do and how I work. There was never any constructive criticism. There was never any, this is what you're supposed to, all right. There was never, this is the gap in it, and this is what you need to work on. It was just blanket, it's not good. it's not quite there yet. It's this, that, and the other, and so I mean, I'm okay with feedback. I'm okay with somebody saying this is not your best work. I'm okay with somebody coming to me and saying that, but tell me how it's not my best work, and then I can kind of make tracks to the point where then I'm obsessing over an email, to the point where I'm obsessing over a piece that should have been handed in 2 hours ago, but I'm so scared and I'm so nervous that I can't even hand it in, because then now this has challenged my whole identity as who I am, as somebody who, anyway, so I was stressed out. They sent me to Glasgow because they said that, again, I wasn't good enough in the London office. And he sat down with me and actually said this to me, looked me dead in the face and said this. And I was like, because it was on a training day and I was with other graduates, and I was like, so is anybody else going? And they were going because that's part of their scheme. That was what they were supposed to do. I had been a year ahead of them, and I only went to the training because it was in kind of retrospect that me and the other person went to do it, because we already had done other training. So we got sent to Glasgow, and I didn't want to go. It was a good experience. I mean, it was nice being in a different city and stuff, but I didn't need to be there personally. Anyway, so I spent a lot of time depressed, really anxious, like feeling physically in my body that I didn't want to be in these places. My 25th birthday was spent at the desk writing, and it was that day I said I'm never spending my birthday at work ever again, and I haven't since. And it's just a kind of, it was like deep emotional issues that were going on, and I broke down 3 times at work, to the point where I was getting grey hairs over the face. My bones were starting to ache. I went to the doctors and they said that I was kind of on track for rheumatoid arthritis if I don't check my stress levels. I don't understand that. Yeah. And I was like, for one so young, I'm dying. You know me, I'm dramatic. So I was like, I'm actually dying. And my mom's like, Alex, please. And so yeah, so once I had to kind of just reevaluate what I wanted out of all of this. And on the top of this, I was running a pretty successful podcast at the time, and I was trying to figure out, I was trying to write, and I was just stressed in so many different areas. Friendships were, at the time, the friendships were fake and false and not really helpful for me, not really conducive. Family, I was living back at home, so there was a lot of that. So I didn't find peace anywhere. Didn't find peace in my friendships, couldn't find peace at work, couldn't find peace at home. It was just a consistent triangle of just stress. And then 2019, my contract ran out at the Metro, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to try and continue this, because I can't be arguing with editors each day about my piece each day. I can't be doing it, because, and it's not even that I'm arguing with them about the quality of it. They're trying to tell me that I didn't do something when I have tracked evidence that I did do something, and they just chose not to see it. But they would never acknowledge that they missed it. So now we're in an argument, and now I'm the problem. You know? Gaslighting and all of that different stuff. And I was just like, you know what, cool, I just don't want to have to be in this. I don't want to have to do that. So I just stressed myself out to the point where my health was really challenged, and that's when I left. And that's the year I got commissioned to write Time to Talk, the book. And because I really started to think about, because I had relaunched my own podcast. At the time it was called What Matters, and then it went to 2.0, which was Time to Talk, and now we're on 3.0. But
what's 3.0 called?
The Mindful Man
there
podcast.
We go.
And I did Time to Talk, and I did that because I was really interested in how men were dealing with this. Because when I was on metro.co.uk, I started a column called Men Talk Health, and that's when I was really kind of getting into asking men about breath work, about their diabetes. I did a piece on penile cancer. I did not even know you could get that But here we are. The penile cancer is something that happened. It happens. Multiple sclerosis, um, suicidality, all those different things. I was interviewing loads of men on all of this stuff, and there was a space for it until I acrimoniously left Metro.co.uk, but for various reasons. And they just said they didn't want to continue doing it. And again, I found that there was a struggle. I kept up against the friction, all the time. I said, when I was on the paper, I said there needs to be men's pages. Why aren't there men's pages? Men do read the Metro as well. I've seen them on the tube reading it. So, but they only wanted to focus on women's stuff in there. Fine. If you look across the British media, like traditional papers, you won't find men's pages unless it's in the Telegraph. Telegraph have a specific audience, which is middle-aged men, and they have a men's editor and they have a men's, but you won't find it anywhere else. You won't find it in the Guardian. Guardian have a women's page. You won't find it in the Mail. The Mail is 65% women readers, so they're not going to have it in there. The Times, they don't have it. You know what I mean? So there were just loads of things. Unless you go to magazines, and magazines are kind of on their own kind of journey with their identity right now. But you don't find it. And I was trying to really push for that. I was really trying to get that. And it wasn't. It was being met with resistance, rejection, gaslighting, and all these other things. So it wasn't good for my health. And I decided that I had to leave. And that's how I ended up here talking about all of this. I ended up training. I ended up writing the book, doing the podcast, training as a coach, becoming a hypnotherapist, training as a psychotherapist. Because I had to understand what was happening with us as men and people generally, because I work with everybody. But if nobody else is going to do it, there you go.
It's crazy hearing you talking about how some of the, I'm going to say, the emotional stuff that you were going through physically manifested itself in symptoms. I think that's something that a lot of times we don't think about. I remember I read a stat years ago, and they said I think like 45 or 50% of the issues that NHS faces that manifest physically is down to a lot of mental and emotional stuff that people refuse to address until it becomes too much, and then the symptoms come out different places. So you and stepping into that, being able to explore it for yourself, feel it, write about it, talk about it, I guess helps even create that connection, because you really know, because you've been in it, you felt it, you explored it. And some of the other points that you've, as part of the overall 5-step breakdown, you have vulnerability, you have courage, vulnerability, worthiness, actually written down, shame, and imperfection. I'm going to skip vulnerability. Because there is, I'm going to skip vulnerability. And I actually want to go to worthiness, imperfection, and courage. Imperfection and worthiness in particular are not a lot of things that are talked about, but they are felt. So I wanted to, and that's why I really want to spend some time to really talk on those subjects and hear you talk on those subjects, so that people can even hear your take, connect, relate to that, and start to even have, a lot of times you can go through stuff and you don't have a name or language for it until you hear someone say, like, oh, that's what it is, that's what I'm feeling, and then you can start to explore what you can do about it.
Worthiness looks at and explores what you deserve and what you feel that you deserve. And for a lot of men, it feels like we have to earn certain things in order for us to feel valued to do certain things. And I think worthiness then plays a lot into how we see ourselves. And I think a lot of the things that I'm working with around worthiness is about how we can kind of maintain a sense of our own self-worth and going in about that. And I think people will look at it and be like, well, men don't have a problem with worthiness or self-worth. They get paid more, they can ask for more money, they have the confidence or the support of the system to be able to do that. But I don't necessarily think it's about material things, because when we think about men in particular, everything is external to us. Everything is about what we can achieve, what we can do, what we can get from somewhere else. And I don't think it's that. I think it's about, are we worthy to ourselves? Do we feel like we deserve love? And you know, my book is about love, belonging, and connection. Do we feel like we need those things? Do we feel like we are worthy as sons, brothers, fathers, cousins, uncles, mentors, to be able to experience that feeling of being valued, being appreciated, being accepted, and just abundance generally? Do we feel that's something that we can get? Do we feel that's something that we deserve and that we need outside of the rest? I've had conversations, I keep having conversations with men about, I was like, what do you feel like men bring to the table? And a lot of people, specifically men, say men bring, if you saw these buildings, the men did that, and men, the house, and providing and protecting and all this different stuff. And I was like, women can do that too, which is fine. And yes, typically men are in that area, typically, because that's kind of what they're put in. Because again, dissociated with their bodies, get made into robots. We just go and do stuff. You know, men are 10 times more likely to die at work than women. All of this different stuff, and to die on the job, and to die. You know, men just be dying out here. I don't know if they be caring. Anyway, but I'm always like, okay, so but what else? But okay, that's fine. All that's external stuff. Earning more money, get into higher positions, doing all this stuff. What else do you bring to the table? What else are you bringing of yourself? Because if your whole perspective on what it means to be a man is that you're working 80 plus hours a week to build a life for yourself and your family, but you can't even benefit from the fruits of that labor because you're going to die early because of, as we've just discussed, the stress that comes with all of that. It manifests in the body. Men don't like to go to get themselves checked out or take care of their health anyway because they don't feel like they should or deserve to do that or feel worthy enough to go and to do these things. And there's an inherent fear of the health system. And if they don't appreciate to do that, and then they catch the prostate cancer too late, they catch the liver cancer too late, they catch the pancreatic cancer too late, they catch the lung, they catch the this, the that, and the other too late. When they die early. And they die early, and then what do they? And then they leave all of that stuff on the earth for their family and whatnot. All the stuff that they never got to see. And my granddad, my maternal granddad, passed when he was 69. And at the time, I was 14, and I thought, oh, 69 is old. But the older I'm getting, I'm like, 69 is not an old age considering my parents are turning 60. And I'm like, that's 10 years away from now. In a sense, when you start to think about it, and he passed away because he worked so hard, he became ill. And I feel like it was a manifestation of all of the stress that kind of just built up in him and whatnot. There have been stories of men taking their lives, and because they don't feel worthy enough to be here, but they have their family, and life insurance is a big thing in particular areas of the world, but here, and I think we've spoken off air about this around life insurance for men and all this different stuff and dads. A lot of men are getting life insurance and then kind of dying by suicide, where they can't say they've died by suicide for the life insurance policy. They have to make it look like it was an accident because they've already seen that they are more value to their family dead than alive. That's the point of worthiness that I'm looking at. Yes, there is the material, there is the money issue, there is all of that stuff, but it's the way that men think about all of that. It's like, okay, cool, if I die, my family can get £2 to £3 million or dollars to cover all of their expenses. They will benefit from me not being here. Let me do that. Let me take my life, and they can actually have one. you know? And then a lot of men feel like they have to go through all of that alone. They got to go through that whole mental process, that whole emotional decline, that all of that stuff by themselves, and then that's where we end up with these men. And a lot of them, I do think that a lot of the reported suicides is not even the correct number. I think it's much higher than it is, and that's still bad. It's bad, but I feel like it's worse than it is, because I feel like there are ways that people are getting around it, because if they stay at suicide, certain families will not be able to survive or to be able to keep themselves afloat in the death. So when it comes to worthiness, that's kind of where I'm looking at it from, because if once you get through the shame part and we get up to worthiness, now we have to really start kind of honing in as to kind of what that looks like for us, and really kind of looking at what we accept, what we're avoiding, what we're acknowledging, all of those kind of areas, because worthiness is important.
As you're talking, I'm thinking, Mum's like, it's when you lean into that side of, I need to provide, and it's a never-ending goal, and that's why even there are times when, I know I've felt it, when to take a break, it's hard, because you're like, yeah, but if I stop, who am I? If I stop doing this, if I stop doing that, if I stop providing that particular way, if I stop even that job that I know is paying well, but I know it's absolutely killing me, like all that kind of stuff can all link into that sense of worthiness. And when you start to really explore, who am I? I remember I wrote an article time ago called "Get to Worthy," but it was get to worthy for yourself, not about your family, your friends, your kids, all that kind of stuff. For you, why are you doing what you're doing? Why do you show up the way you show up? Why do you talk the way you talk? Is it influenced by like all this kind of stuff? And even a lot of times on the podcast, one of the strap lines is leading from the inside out, not from the outside in. And that really speaks to that. So I hope people are actually listening and taking this in what you're talking about worthiness, because it's so important for people to really think about the actions that we take in our day-to-day lives and really do some work exploring that, because that work is not easy. It is not easy at all. That's why you need to lean into people like yourself to be able to work alongside of you to really get into depth of ourselves, to open that up.
Yeah, we have to be able to really understand our internal worlds a lot. And this is why I went into hypnotherapy initially. At first I was thinking, what is it? Because I trained as a health coach first, and on my journey to seeking things. But I was like, on my journey to seeking. But I recognized that because of what I went through physically from the stress, I wanted to know what happens to the body. And yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical doctor, so I'm not going in with the certain things, but it's enough to understand the nervous system and what happens when the nervous system shuts down, and particular part, your body works as a system, and everything is connected, and it needs to work in a way that helps it optimize itself in the best possible way. And so in order to do that, I had to look at the health coaching to figure out how the heart works, how the lungs work, what the nervous system is like, what the hormonal gland, what hormones do, what happens in the brain, spine. And then when I went to do the coaching module, and I figured out that the therapeutic relationship between coach and client and what that looks like, I began to look deeper into therapy as a way to do this. But it led me to hypnotherapy as an entry point, and hypnotherapy works very, very specifically with this, with the physical health of people, tapping into the body itself, and certain areas of it can be very useful in that way. And I think that when I was doing a lot of the training, one of my teachers, and even one of my colleagues at the time, he was like, "Oh, you have a very good sense of your internal world. Like, you can get lost in your stuff. Like, you're not afraid to go where it's dark and, you know, figure out what is happening there with you. And I was like, yeah, I've had, because I'm introverted, and I've always kind of spent a lot of time by myself, and I've always had to really kind of assess where my heart is at any given point. And there was a period of time where I was really disconnected from myself, and I had to kind of find a way to reconnect myself. Utilizing that to kind of understand and get and really speak to men, and everybody, but speak to men about how we can really understand that inner voice and that inner child and that inner space was super important to me, which is why I'm kind of stepping into the psychotherapy with the hypnotherapy, but also the mindfulness side of stuff, because it's about really understanding our internal voice, but also being present enough to understand what's happening around, knowing how we feel when we get riled up, knowing what the buttons are for us, but what happens when those buttons are pushed. How far do you let the trigger points take you? You know, if somebody says something to you, do you then generalize the belief as all people think this, or do you go and seek more information to figure out what that is? It's like what you said about your wife saying, be a man, what is, and then you're like, and then you sat down and thought, what do you mean by that? That is then you stepping into mindfulness to be like, okay, so what do you actually mean by that? Because then now you've got more information, and then now you can actually make an assessed judgment on that. Challenging. Because as I keep saying, men are so external. Everything is about how other people view you. But these are the conversations that we don't have. We don't talk about. We will talk about everything else. We talk about football. You talk about gaming. You talk about girl. You talk about gossip. You talk about everything else. But to have a real talk conversation is really, really hard, but it's also really fundamental and actually quite life-giving. And that's why it's so important. And and this conversation can go so long, but I mean, it's life-giving. But I mean, this is why I'm starting with shame, shame and trauma with men, because men don't talk about a lot of stuff. And if we were to sit down and really rewind and look through the minutiae details of a man's life, we'll find that there is a lot of stuff that has been either said to him, done by him, done to others, that actually has impacted the way he feels about himself. And then that then impacts how he treats others. And then that impacts how the rest of the thing. So how can men begin to be able to, in a sense, connect with themselves, work with someone like you, lean into working with someone like you? Because even that initial step requires like courage and all of that kind of stuff. They're listening to all of this, listen to this conversation, they can relate to some of those symptoms and things that you've shared so far. They're like, yeah, but I'm not sure, I don't know, that hesitation is there. Like, how can we begin to break some of those boundaries down so people can actually do something about it and reach out and get the help that they need? Well, first question I would always ask myself is how long do you think you can last? Ask yourself that, because then people are saying, I don't know, I understand what you're saying, but I'm not. How long do you think you can last? We know the suicide rates. We know, look how long your dad lasted. Look at how long you've kind of held all of this stuff to yourself. Look at your relationships. Are they where you want them to be? Look at your career. Is it where you want it to be? Ask yourself these questions. Not everything has to be for you. That's absolutely fine. But ask yourself the questions, and you'll end up, and whatever they end up being, make the decision. But other than that, creating workshops. I'm creating workshops for men to come to be able to have these conversations in spaces with other men. And I'm very interested in high-performing men at the moment, because there has to be a very particular personality type to get to very specific positions and want to do certain things. Whether that be founders, CEOs, lawyers, and whatnot. But I'm also interested in just the everyday person, everyday man who is trying to get through every single day, like, in a way that he best possibly can. Because as much as whatever our status is, we are all going through very similar things, and I think that's what I'm trying to achieve here. So, yeah, look out for the workshops. Look out for that. But I would say,
look out where? Where can we find
you'll
out?
find that all everywhere. You'll find it on my website, alexholmes.co. You find it through the podcast. Even if you want the best entry point would be the podcast, because then you would you would hear me speak, you will hear the content, you will hear the topics, and that's where you're going to hear all the updates about where the workshops are going to be at, what it's going to look like, what that looks like for you. I would say so. The Mindful Man podcast is where you need to be. So yeah.
And I guess my last question would be, how do you define leadership, Alex?
How do I define leadership? I define leadership as a wholehearted approach to a common goal. And I think that it's not about managing others. It's not about necessarily managing yourself, but it's about leading and guiding and mentoring and community. It's about being wholehearted in your approach to the goals that you need. Whether that means you're leading a family, whether that means you're leading yourself, whether that means you're leading a team, I think the approach is always the same. Wholeheartedness.
Thank you. Thank you for just being real. I think a lot of times it's very easy to get into these conversations and it's so high level that you can sometimes feel so far removed that you can't relate to it, or it's so philosophical you're spending your time looking up a dictionary trying to understand the words. But there are times when you just need someone just to be real, to lean in with their experiences, backed up with knowledge, the science, the data, all that kind of stuff. It's all there, it's all relevant. Alex is completely trained up. But you just need someone you can relate to. And that's something that you've done today, something that I've learned so much, and other people listening would have done. And when people reach out, people connect, all the information about Alex that he's already shared will be in the show notes. You can definitely get involved, work with him, buy the book. And in the near future, we'll have Alex back to carry this conversation, because there was so much more we could have gone down today, but we'll just kind of run out of time. But thank you very much for today. I really appreciate it.
Nah, man. Thank you so much for inviting me.
It's Everyday Leadership. We'll see you next week.